The spoon trembled in my hand like it weighed 100 pounds. My fingers wouldn't obey me. My wrist kept twitching. I stared at the bowl of soup in front of me, lukewarm now, untouched. It had taken me nearly 30 minutes just to get from the bed to the kitchen chair. My son had left it on the table with a napkin folded underneath, like it was something generous, like I hadn't spent 30 years making sure he never once went hungry. I had barely lifted the spoon to my lips when I heard his voice from the hallway, calm, cold, almost bored. "She's just a burden." 4 words. I felt every syllable like a blow to the chest. At first I thought I had imagined it, that maybe the medications were messing with my head. But then his wife replied, "I know, but we can't keep doing this." Doing what? Letting me exist? Breathing in their house? I blinked hard, the soup untouched, my hands still trembling. The heat in my face didn't come from the fever. It was shame, humiliation, rage, but worst of all, heartbreak. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know how every word landed like a knife. Or maybe they did. Maybe they didn't care. An hour later, the knock on the door changed my life forever. It was hard, loud, deliberate. 3 heavy knocks followed by silence. I already knew. I don't know how, but something inside me just knew. My body, still recovering from the stroke, refused to cooperate. I struggled to get up, the chair scraping across the tiles. My legs shook beneath me. I dragged myself to the door with the help of the wall, gripping it like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. When I opened it, 2 officers in dark jackets stood there. Ice. I will never forget the way they looked at me. Not with cruelty, not with sympathy, just indifference. Like I was a task to be completed, a checkbox, a file number. "Carmen Rosales?" one of them asked. I nodded. My mouth was dry. My heart pounded in my chest like it was trying to escape. "We received a tip. We're going to need to ask you a few questions." A tip, that's what they called it. I wasn't a mother anymore. A grandmother, a survivor. I was a tip, and I knew exactly who made that call. I was still recovering, still learning how to walk again. I couldn't drive, could barely shower alone. And now I had to answer questions about my immigration status, about where I had been the last 30 years, about whether I was a danger. I had spent my life cleaning floors, changing adult diapers, holding hands of strangers in their final moments. I had worked holidays, missed birthdays, never once called in sick. I never broke a law, not once. I paid taxes, raised my son alone, sent him to college, gave him everything. And still, that wasn't enough. What does it take for a mother to become a stranger in her own home? I remember the look in the younger officer's eyes when he saw the cane, the bruises on my legs, the trembling hand that reached for the ID. Something shifted, a pause, but not enough to stop what had already begun, because someone gave them my name, my address, my story, someone I loved, someone I raised, Mateo, my firstborn, my boy. The same boy who, at 5, clung to my legs crying when I left for my night shift, who waited at the window with a blanket when I got home at dawn, who once told his teacher his mom was a superhero because she could make dinner with one hand and check homework with the other. He gave me away with one phone call, and the worst part is, not that he did it, it's that I understood why. To him, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a burden, a responsibility, something to be managed, to be removed. My disability, my status, my body, none of it fit the life he wanted. He wanted space, freedom, silence, and I was just noise. I don't know how long the officers stayed. I remember them taking notes, asking for documents I couldn't easily reach, watching me struggle to walk across the room while my son stayed upstairs in his room, pretending not to hear. They asked if I had anyone else I could stay with, if I had family, friends. I laughed. It was bitter, ugly. Family? I was standing in the house I paid for, in the home I built with decades of sweat, and still, I was being asked if I had family. The house was no longer mine. My body was no longer mine. Even my story, it seemed, had been taken and rewritten by someone else. I want you to take a moment to ask yourself something honest. Have you ever felt like a ghost? In your own life? Like the people you gave everything to now act like you never mattered? If yes, I want you to comment below. Just write, "I matter." Because you do. You still do. And your story deserves to be heard. And if you believe stories like this must not stay in the shadows, subscribe to the channel. Every time you do, you help give voice to people who are too often silenced, erased, forgotten. This is not just my story. It could be anyone's. Maybe it's yours too. Because betrayal doesn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it comes with silence, with cold soup, and a phone call. My name is Carmen Rosales. I am 61 years old. I live in a modest, single-story home in Patterson, California, tucked behind a chain-link fence and a dry patch of grass that used to be a garden. People pass by and see a tired house, maybe a woman too old for this country. What they don't see is the story hiding inside these walls. What they don't see is me. I used to work as a home aide for elderly patients, long shifts, heavy lifting, diapers, bed sores, broken families, and sometimes broken people. I cleaned vomit off pillows and spoon-fed soup into mouths that no longer remembered who they were. And still, I showed up because I knew what it meant to be alone, and I believed that love, even from a stranger, could ease pain. That job, that life, gave me meaning. It gave me purpose. It gave me a way to survive as an undocumented woman in a country that sees you only when it needs something from you. I never complained. I never stopped until my body did. After the stroke, everything slowed down. My speech slurred, my leg dragged, my hands didn't move like they used to. But worse than the physical pain was the silence that settled between me and my son. The way he looked through me, not at me, like I was furniture, like I was in the way. Mateo, my son, my firstborn. He was the reason I crossed the border in the first place. He was the reason I cleaned bathrooms in strangers' houses until my knees cracked. I used to carry his school picture in my wallet. Now he walks past me in the hallway without saying a word. We live in the same house, but we are not in the same world. He and his wife sleep in the master bedroom. I sleep in what used to be the laundry room. There's no window, just a small mattress on the floor and a fan that rattles in the corner. My cane leans against a milk crate that I use as a nightstand. Sometimes I wake up confused, thinking I'm back in the shelter where I stayed for a week after my surgery, because that room feels just as cold. In the morning, I wait. I listen for footsteps. If I hear them heading toward the kitchen, I stay in my room. I don't want to be a nuisance. I don't want to slow anyone down. I have learned to shrink myself, to disappear inside a house that I helped pay for. Every few days, Mateo brings home groceries. Sometimes, he sets aside a carton of milk or a bag of rice for me. But other times, I hear them whispering behind the closed door of the kitchen. We can't afford this. She needs to start contributing. It's not fair. They say these things like, I'm not still alive, like I can't hear through walls that are thin and worn. One night, I overheard his wife say, why is she even still here? She doesn't have papers. What if someone finds out? The room spun. It wasn't just that they wanted me gone. It was that they were ashamed of me. I used to think that shame only came from the outside, from the way the world looked at us, from the whispers at the grocery store when I pulled out food stamps, from the stares when I spoke Spanish too loud on the bus. I never imagined that shame could come from inside my own blood. My son used to be proud of me. He used to tell his friends, my mom's a fighter. She came here with nothing and gave me everything. He used to write me cards on Mother's Day that said I was his hero. Now, he avoids me, avoids eye contact, avoids responsibility. They tell you in those immigration workshops to never depend on family, that when things go wrong, you'll be on your own. I never believed it. I believed in love, in sacrifice, in the promise that if you gave your children the world, they would never throw you away. I believed wrong. Sometimes at night, I scroll through old photos on the second-hand phone I keep hidden in a box under my mattress. There's one of Mateo at his graduation, cap slightly crooked, me in a borrowed dress, smiling next to him. I remember how my back ached from standing all day at work so I could buy him a suit for that day. He didn't know I hadn't eaten in 2 days to afford it. In the photo, he is smiling. I am glowing. Now, he won't even take me to my physical therapy appointments. I had to beg the neighbor's teenage daughter for a ride last week. She didn't ask questions. She just helped me into the car and turned up the music so I wouldn't hear her crying, because she could see it. What? My son refused to. That I was fading. Not just from illness, from abandonment, from being erased by the people I loved the most. When you become invisible to your own child, you start to question your worth. You start to wonder if you ever mattered at all. If all the nights you stayed up nursing fevers, all the lunches you skipped so they could eat, all the prayers you whispered into cracked pillows were ever enough. But here's what I've learned. Your worth is not defined by the ones who turn their backs on you. Your worth is in your scars, in your strength, in your survival. If you are watching this, and you've ever felt discarded by someone you gave your heart to, please write, I deserve better in the comments, because you do. You always have. And if these stories resonate with you, if they reflect something you've lived or feared, I invite you to subscribe, not because numbers matter, but because voices do. And the more voices we gather here, the harder it is to silence us. Because people like us, we were never meant to disappear. I was born in a house with no floor, just packed dirt that turned to mud in the rainy season and cracked open like skin in the dry heat. We didn't have windows, only wooden shutters we'd close when the wind picked up too much dust. My mother cooked over an open fire outside, and we bathed in a bucket behind the house, praying no one walked by. We were poor in a way that people here in the United States can't quite picture. Not just low income, not struggling, forgotten. I grew up in Oaxaca, Mexico, in a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. There were chickens in the yard, stray dogs in the street, and children everywhere with bellies full of air and not much else. My father worked as a mason when there was work. When there wasn't, he fished or hunted iguanas. My mother made tortillas by hand and sold them door to door. We didn't have shoes for school, so we walked barefoot on gravel and dust, our feet growing. Tougher than our hearts. There was never enough. Not food, not water, not hope, but there was family. My mother used to say that poverty can take your money, but it can't take your dignity if you hold on to each other. I believed that with my whole heart, until the day I had to choose between staying with my family or saving my son. Mateo was born when I was just 19. His father was a boy who whispered promises under the moonlight and vanished before the sun rose. I named Mateo after my grandfather, a man who used to say the most valuable thing a woman can carry is the strength to walk away. So I walked, away from my village, away from shame, towards something better. At first, I tried to make it work in Mexico. I cleaned houses in the nearby city. I sold tamales in the bus station. I even worked as a nanny for a wealthy family whose children had more toys than I had owned in my entire life. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. Mateo needed milk, shoes, medicine. And I was always one illness or one late payment away from disaster. I remember the night I decided to leave like it happened yesterday. Mateo had a fever that wouldn't break. I carried him to the local clinic, a building with cracked walls and one nurse. She checked his forehead, looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You need to take him to the city. We don't have the equipment here." But I didn't have bus money. That night, I rocked my son to sleep with tears in my eyes and made a promise. I would never let him suffer like this again. A week later, I kissed my mother goodbye. She pressed a small silver cross into my palm and told me to keep it close. I haven't taken it off since. I crossed the border at 23 years old with nothing but a backpack, a bottle of water, and a photo of Mateo folded in my shoe. I paid a man half of my life savings to get me to the other side. He promised it would be quick, safe. It was neither. We walked for 3 days through the desert. The heat was like fire crawling over your skin. Your mouth dries out in the first few hours, but your body keeps walking because it knows if you stop, you die. I saw people collapse. A woman vomited blood. A man cried out for his mother before he stopped moving altogether. You don't forget those things. At the crossing point, I held my breath and prayed. When we made it through, I collapsed behind a dumpster behind a gas station in Arizona. The coyote handed me a bus ticket and vanished. I sat there for 2 hours before I had the strength to stand again. The bus took me to Los Angeles. A cousin of a cousin let me sleep on their floor for 2 weeks. I got my first job cleaning offices at night, then another during the day. I sent money back every month, folded into letters I wrote in careful print. Mateo, Mama loves you. Be strong. Be patient. I will see you soon. I missed his first steps, his first words, his first birthday. But every month, the money went home. Enough for medicine, for school, for shoes that didn't fall apart after a week. I told myself it was worth it, that one day he'd understand, that all this pain had a purpose. When I finally brought Mateo to the United States, he was 7, skinny, quiet. He didn't remember me. He clung to my mother at the airport and called me Señora. That night, he fell asleep in my arms, and for the first time in years, I felt whole again. We shared a room in a house with 3 other families. I worked while he went to school. Every Friday, I let him pick one treat from the corner store. A candy, a juice, something small, a celebration of survival. Over time, he started calling me Mama again. He learned English fast, faster than me. He'd translate for me at the bank, at the grocery store. He corrected my pronunciation. He rolled his eyes when I didn't understand pop culture. He started calling burritos wraps and refused to speak Spanish at home. I told myself it was normal, that he was adapting, that this was what I had wanted. a better life, a better future. But sometimes I wonder if, in giving him everything, I lost him. There's a photo I keep in my wallet. It's me and Mateo on the day he got his green card. I look proud. He looks distracted, his phone in his hand, already somewhere else. If you've ever given everything to someone, only to feel like a stranger when they finally succeed, I want to hear from you. Write "I still matter" in the comments. Let this be the place where our voices are not ignored, where our stories are not erased. And if you're someone who believes in honoring the struggle behind every immigrant face, please subscribe. It's more than a button. It's a way to say, we see you, we hear you, you are not invisible. Sacrifice is not glamorous, it is not loud, it is not always recognized. Most of the time, it is quiet, invisible, and unthanked. It looks like eating leftovers while your child has the last piece of meat. It looks like walking to work in the rain, so your son can take the bus to school dry. It looks like mending the same shirt 10 times because every dollar counts. My entire life became an act of disappearing so that Mateo could shine. When I arrived in the United States, I quickly realized the American dream did not come wrapped in gold. It came in bleach-stained aprons, aching backs, and the constant fear of being discovered. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I cleaned homes during the day and cared for elderly patients at night. My hands, cracked from the chemicals, my feet were swollen and raw, but I kept going because I had a goal, my son. I remember the way I budgeted each paycheck like it was a military operation. Rent, groceries, phone card to call home, and whatever was left, no matter how small, went to Mateo. I would walk through stores and look at clothes, imagining how he'd look in them, then leave empty-handed. My closet had 4 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, 1 old coat, but Mateo had everything he needed. I made sure of that. When he moved in with me, I promised myself he would never feel poor. He had the newest school supplies, a backpack with his favorite cartoon. He went on school field trips, even when I had to skip meals to pay for them. His lunches were always full. His clothes were always clean. He never knew that I sometimes ate rice and salt for dinner, that I borrowed toilet paper from the houses I cleaned because we had run out at home. My favorite memory is the day I surprised him with a used bicycle I bought from a garage sale. I had saved coins in a jar for months, quarters and dimes from laundry machines, tips from clients, whatever I could find. When I brought it home, he stared at it in disbelief. "For me?" he asked. I nodded, pretending it was nothing. But inside, I was crying. Because in that moment, I felt like I had done something right. He rode that bike until the tires wore thin. He named it Blue Lightning. He even put stickers on it and parked it by the door like it was a prized car. Those were the years when he still hugged me before bed, when he still thanked me for dinner, when he still saw me. As he got older, things began to change. He wanted things I couldn't always afford. Branded clothes, game consoles, a smartphone. I picked up extra shifts, cleaned houses on weekends, even took dangerous night jobs in neighborhoods that made my heart race every time I walked in. I told myself it was just a phase, that teenagers are like that he'd grow out of it. But deep down, I noticed how the things I used to do for him started becoming expectations instead of gifts. He stopped saying thank you. He stopped asking if I was tired after work. He rolled his eyes when I spoke Spanish in public. And when I corrected him on something, he would snap, "You don't even know how things work here." That sentence stayed with me. Because maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't understand this new world. The one where mothers were disposable once they had served their same purpose. The one where your value was measured by how convenient you were to someone else's life. Still, I kept giving. When Mateo applied to college, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. I didn't even know what FAFSA was. I had no idea how to fill out applications or apply for scholarships. But I learned. I asked questions at the community center. I watched videos in English I barely understood. I sat in waiting rooms for hours to speak with advisors who often looked at me like I was wasting their time. But I did it. He got in. I cleaned a mansion for 3 months just to pay for his first semester books. The woman who owned the house had chandeliers bigger than my entire bedroom. She never looked me in the eye. But every time I dusted her living room, I imagined Mateo walking through his college campus, holding those books in his hands. I never visited the campus. I didn't want to embarrass him. The day he moved into his dorm, he barely let me take a photo. He looked uncomfortable, like I didn't belong there. I handed him a homemade container of tamales, and he whispered, "Mom, people are looking." I laughed to hide the hurt. I told him I understood, that I'd always be here if he needed me. He didn't look back when he walked away, but I watched until he was gone. Even after he left, I kept sending money. He needed help with rent, with groceries, with books. I never asked questions. I just worked more, canceled doctor appointments, skipped my own, medication refills. My knees started to give out. My vision got worse, but I kept working, kept giving, because that's what mothers do, even when they are forgotten, especially when they are forgotten. I often wonder what would have happened if I had kept something for myself, a savings account, a hobby, a boundary, but I didn't, because in my world, love looked like sacrifice, and I loved my son more than anything. If you are a parent who gave until it hurt and then gave some more, please comment below with the words, "I gave everything." Let this be the space where your love is finally seen and honored. And if you believe that mothers like me deserve to be remembered, not erased, hit subscribe. Together, we are rewriting what love looks like when it refuses to give up. The first time I noticed the distance, it wasn't in his words, it was in his eyes. Mateo had just turned 15. We were walking back from the grocery store, and I reached for his arm as we crossed the street. He pulled away, not roughly, not angrily, just like a stranger would. That small gesture cut through me deeper than any insult ever could. My son no longer wanted to be touched by my hand. I told myself it was adolescence, that teenagers go through phases, that he'd come back around. But as the weeks passed, the silence between us grew louder. He stopped sitting with me at dinner. He started eating in his room. His door was always closed. I used to knock, gently, and ask if he needed anything. He would reply with one word, or sometimes not at all. He used to wait for me to come home from work. Now I'd walk in and find him with headphones on, back turned, a wall of noise between us. What hurt the most wasn't the distance. It was how quickly he adapted to it. At school, he began using a different name, Matt. He stopped speaking Spanish, even when I tried. I would ask, "¿Cómo estuvo tu día?" And he'd respond, "It was fine," short, flat, as if my language embarrassed him. I once heard him on the phone with a friend saying, "My mom doesn't really speak English. It's hard sometimes." But I did speak English. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to understand that my voice no longer fit into his world. There was a day at the mall I'll never forget. We were in a department store, and I tried to hold up a shirt for him, something nice, on sale. He looked around nervously and said, "Can you not talk so loud?" I froze. I wasn't shouting. I was just being myself. A Mexican woman with an accent, a mother trying to buy her son something decent. I lowered the shirt and said nothing. He never wore it. Later that year, he got his driver's license. He didn't ask me to come to the DMV. He went with a friend. I found out through a photo he posted online. He smiled proudly in the picture, keys in hand, captioned, "Freedom." I wasn't in the frame. I wasn't even mentioned. I tried to hold on to the small things, making his favorite soup when he had exams, folding his laundry just the way he liked it, leaving notes in his lunch, but the notes started coming back untouched. The soup went cold on the stove. He started doing his own laundry, not because he wanted to help, but because he didn't want me touching his clothes. Sometimes I would walk past his room and hear him laugh. Not with me, never with me, always with someone else. A friend, a girl, a voice through his phone. I realized I had become background noise, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, familiar but unnoticed. One evening, I saw a message light up on his phone while he was in the shower. I didn't mean to look, but my eyes caught it before I could turn away. "She's so old school, always asking if I'm hungry, like I'm 5. My hands trembled. I was just trying to care. Isn't that what mothers do? He started spending more time away, coming home late, avoiding eye contact. When I asked where he was, he would say, "Out." That was it, just out. As if my concern was a nuisance, as if I was nothing but a woman he happened to live with. And then one day, I heard him say it directly. I was in the hallway, folding towels, when he didn't realize I was there. He was speaking to his girlfriend on the phone. She means well, I guess, but honestly, she just gets in the way. I froze, towel in hand, breath stuck in my throat. In the way, that was what I had become. A barrier, an inconvenience, something to step around. I stopped folding. I went back to my room. I didn't cry. Not then. My tears had learned to wait. The betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in. It starts with less laughter, less talking, less presence. Then it becomes avoidance, then irritation, then rejection. When Mateo got his first full-time job, he didn't tell me. I found out when he came home with a new phone. I congratulated him. I hugged him. He didn't hug back. When he got his first paycheck, I smiled and said, Maybe you can take me out for ice cream. He said, I'm kind of saving for other things. I nodded, quietly. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, holding the small coin purse where I kept grocery change. I opened it, closed it, opened it again. I wasn't sad about the ice cream. I was sad about what it symbolized, that he didn't want to share joy with me anymore. I stopped asking for time. I stopped suggesting walks. I stopped cooking his favorite dishes. I learned to silence myself in his presence, hoping that maybe my stillness would make him notice me again. But silence only made it easier for him to forget. One day, I asked him if we could talk, really talk. He sighed, glanced at his phone and said, "What is it, Mom?" I looked into his face, searching for the boy I raised. The boy who once cried when I left for work, the boy who kissed my cheek just for fun. But he was gone. "I miss you," I said. He shrugged. "I'm right here." But he wasn't. He was a shadow, a voice behind a door, a presence that passed me in the hallway without stopping. I often wonder what moment broke us, what day, what word, what gesture turned love into distance. But love doesn't disappear like a light switch. It dims, gradually, until one day you realize you're sitting in the dark and the person you thought would always be your light has already walked out. If you've ever watched someone you love drift away and felt powerless to stop it, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment that says, "I remember the silence," because sometimes silence says more than words ever could. And if you're someone who still believes in the power of a mother's love, even when it's forgotten or rejected, I hope you'll subscribe. Every time you do, you help us remind the world that the bond between a mother and her child should never be disposable. It started as a strange tingling in my fingertips. I was standing at the sink, rinsing off a plate from the night before. The morning light was coming through the window, and the smell of coffee still lingered in the air. I remember that clearly. But what happened next is blurred, as if someone took the film reel of my life and tore it in half. My right hand gave out. The plate slipped from my grasp and crashed to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. The sound was sharp, but distant, like it was happening underwater. I tried to bend down to pick it up, but my legs wouldn't move right. My body felt heavy. My balance vanished. The floor tilted beneath me, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed. The ceiling tiles were pale and endless. There was a machine beeping next to me, and a dull pain radiating from the left side of my head down through my shoulder. A nurse appeared and told me I had a stroke. A minor one, they said, but it did not feel minor to me. Nothing felt minor anymore. Half of my face didn't move the way it used to. My hand trembled uncontrollably. My legs, once strong enough to clean 3 houses in a single day, now gave out after 3 steps. I couldn't speak clearly. I sounded drunk, confused, like a stranger had taken up residence inside my mouth. Mateo showed up 2 days later. He stood at the foot of the hospital bed with his arms crossed, phone in hand. He didn't ask how I was. He asked how long I'd be there. I told him I didn't know. He sighed, said he'd been busy with work. I nodded, even though I hadn't asked for anything. I just wanted to see his face. I just wanted him to hold my hand. He never did. The doctor explained that I'd need physical therapy, speech therapy, follow-ups, medications, rest. They spoke slowly, as if I were deaf instead of sick. Mateo kept checking his watch. When the doctor left, he turned to me and said, "So what's the plan?" The plan had always been me working, supporting, managing. Now he expected me to have a plan for this too, for my broken body, for my lost independence. I told him I'd need his help. He didn't respond. They discharged me 2 days later. Mateo picked me up in silence. I struggled to get into the car. He didn't offer his hand. I felt like luggage being loaded into a trunk. At home, everything had changed. My room, which had once been the laundry room, now felt like a prison. The floor was hard, the light too dim. The fan buzzed overhead like a mosquito trapped in its own grief. I couldn't cook, couldn't clean, couldn't move without my cane. I had to relearn how to get dressed, how to tie my shoes, how to hold a spoon. And in the middle of all that, I also had to learn how to need someone who didn't want to be needed. Asking for help became a shameful ritual. "Can you help me with the shower? I'm tired. Can it wait? Can you pick up my prescription? I'm working. Do it online. Can you drive me to therapy? I don't have time." So I stopped asking. I missed appointments. My body ached. I dropped things constantly. Once, I spilled soup all over myself and sat there for 20 minutes, too embarrassed to move. No one came to check on me. No one noticed. The hardest part of recovery wasn't the pain or the weakness. It was the silence that filled the space where care should have been. It was the slow erosion of dignity, of feeling like a person. I remember one night, sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They were swollen and stiff. They used to braid Mateo's hair, pack his lunches, sew patches on his jeans. Now they trembled like leaves in the wind. I whispered to myself, I'm still here. I needed to hear it out loud, because no one else was saying it. There was a woman at therapy named Martha. She was 70, recovering from her second stroke. Her son visited her every session, held her hand, helped her lift her arm, encouraged her. She told me, stroke doesn't kill the body, loneliness does. She was right. One morning, I tried to walk to the bathroom alone. My knee gave out. I fell hard, hitting my shoulder on the wall. The sound must have echoed. Mateo's wife came rushing in, but instead of helping me up, she stared. You can't keep doing this, she said. It's not safe. I nodded. My face burned with shame. They bought a baby monitor and put it in my room. Said it was for my safety, but it felt like surveillance, like I had become a child again, an unwanted one. I started talking less, eating less, existing less, until the day I overheard Mateo say the words, I will never forget. She just takes up space. She just gives us more problems. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with resignation, as if I were a broken appliance. An old TV they didn't know where to throw away. I sat in my room for hours after that, staring at the walls, tracing the cracks with my eyes, wondering if this was it, if this was all I would become. Then I looked down at my hands again, still trembling, still weak, but still mine. If you've ever had to relearn how to live in a world that forgot how to care for you, I want you to write in the comments, I am still here, because you are, and you deserve to be seen. And if you believe no one should ever have to recover in silence, subscribe to this channel. Every click is a light in someone's darkest room. Every voice matters, especially when the world wants to turn the volume down on our pain. The morning they came for me, I was brushing my teeth with my left hand, the one that still worked. My right arm had lost most of its strength after the stroke, but I had trained myself to adapt, slowly, clumsily. My body was still learning, even if the people around me had already given up. The knock at the door was too firm, too direct, the kind that vibrates through your chest before your mind catches up. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, a ribbon of toothpaste foam sliding down my chin. Mateo opened the door. I heard his voice, casual, as if nothing unusual was happening. Then silence, then footsteps, and then they were in front of me. Two men, dressed plain. One held a folder, the other scanned the room like he was looking for contraband. But all he would have found was a plastic basin I used to wash clothes, a calendar with saints taped to the wall, and the scent of lavender oil I rubbed on my joints each morning. Carmen Rosales? The taller one asked. I nodded. My heart beat so loudly, I thought they could hear it echoing off the tile. We received an anonymous tip, he continued. We need to ask you a few questions regarding your immigration status. Anonymous. But I already knew who it was. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It doesn't throw things. It doesn't leave bruises. It comes in the form of phone calls, of whispers, of sons who no longer want to share a house with the mother who raised them. Mateo had made his choice, and he had done it with the same cold efficiency I had once admired in him. I was not arrested, not that day. They said it was a check, a routine process, but I knew the look in their eyes. They weren't here for answers. They were here to begin a file. They asked for my documents. I explained I had none, that I had arrived decades ago, that I worked, paid taxes, raised a son. They nodded, unbothered, took notes, asked about employment history, travel, medical status, dependence. I sat there answering questions with my trembling hands resting in my lap. I felt like a criminal in my own kitchen. When they left, I didn't cry. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. I was no longer a mother. I was a case number. Later that evening, I heard Mateo and his wife in the living room. They spoke in hushed voices, but the walls in our house are paper thin. They said it was the only way, that things had become too difficult, that I needed help from the system, that maybe this was for the best, for the best. I cooked for him when he was sick, slept on hospital floors when he had the flu, sold my jewelry to pay for his school books. But now, turning me over to immigration was for the best. I stopped eating for 2 days after that. Food lost its flavor. Water felt thick. I kept hearing their voices on loop. The word burden, the word problem, the word gone. On the third night, I collapsed in the hallway. My legs buckled, and I slid to the floor like a sheet of paper. Matteo stepped over me. Literally. He didn't even notice. I laid there for hours, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. I thought about running, but where? Would I go? I didn't have papers. I didn't have money. I didn't even have 2 good legs. My world had shrunk to the size of this house, and now even that was being taken from me. The next morning, the letters started arriving. From the Department of Homeland Security, thick envelopes with instructions, appointments, warnings. I brought them to Matteo. He glanced at them, said, "Just do what they say." I asked, "Why?" He looked at me like I had asked something stupid. He said, "Because it's already done." That sentence broke something in me that no stroke ever could, because it was true. The call had been made. The machine had started. There was no undoing it. I was being removed, slowly, legally, silently. The people who write immigration policy don't see the woman I am. They don't see the hands that cleaned hospitals or the back that bent for 30 years without complaint. They don't see the mother who taught her son how to tie his shoes and spell his name. They only see status, and mine was expired. But I am not expired. I am not disposable. I am not just a number. If you've ever been made to feel like your entire life could be erased with a signature or a phone call, please comment below with the words, "I am more than my papers," because you are. We all are. And if you believe stories like this must be told, not buried, subscribe to this channel. Let this be a place where no one has to face this kind of betrayal in silence again, where every mother's voice is heard, even when the world tries to shut her out. When the notice came for my first immigration hearing, I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour just staring at it. The paper felt heavy in my hands, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. A countdown, a deadline, a decision that would be made by someone who had never met me, never heard my story, never seen the years carved into my hands. All they would see was a name, a country of origin, a missing piece of paper. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside a small notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. The same notebook where I used to write down grocery lists and reminders. Now it held dates that could change my life forever. I didn't tell anyone in the house. I didn't ask Matteo for help. I didn't trust what his answer would be. Instead, I walked, slowly, painfully, to the church on the corner, the one with chipped paint and a crooked bell. I had never gone inside before, but that day, I pushed open the door and stepped into the silence. A woman with a soft voice and tired eyes greeted me. Her name was Teresa. She was the secretary, but more than that, she was a listener. I told her everything, about the knock at the door, about the papers, about the son who had forgotten how to love. She didn't interrupt. She just placed a warm hand on mine and said, "We'll figure something out." She gave me a number to call, an immigration aid center, volunteers who helped people like me, people whose lives were falling apart one official envelope at a time. I made the call the next day. My voice trembled. I stumbled over my English, but they listened. They didn't rush me. That call changed everything. They assigned me to a woman named Maria. She was small, sharp, and full of questions. She asked me about my work history, my medical records, my family, my entry into the country. I answered everything honestly. She never promised it would be easy. She only promised to try. We started gathering documents, old pay stubs, letters from former employers, photos of me working, photos of me and Matteo, proof that I had lived here, that I had contributed, that I mattered. I reached out to a woman I had once cared for. Her name was Mrs. Henderson. I had helped her for 3 years before she passed. Her daughter, Laura, remembered me. She wrote a letter on my behalf, said I had become part of their family, said I had cared for her mother with more tenderness than most nurses. That letter became part of my case. So did the bills in my name, the receipts from the pharmacy, the statement from the hospital after my stroke. Everything added up. A life lived quietly, but fully. But it still might not be enough. Maria explained that the system does not always recognize sacrifice. It recognizes status, procedure, protocol. I could still be deported, she said, even after everything I had given. I nodded. I understood. I had spent my whole life giving without guarantees. The court date crept closer like a shadow. Each day felt heavier. I started packing small bags in secret, just in case. A few clothes, a rosary, my cross necklace, the photo of Matteo when he was 5, the one where he's smiling without knowing the cost of that smile. At night, I couldn't sleep. My legs ached. My mind raced. I imagined being taken in the middle of the night, I imagined the cold of the detention center, the fluorescent lights, the waiting. But what I feared most was disappearing, quietly, without ceremony, as if I had never been here. I started writing letters, one to Matteo, one to his wife, one to the church. I didn't know if I'd need them, but I needed to say the things I had kept inside for too long, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't want my story to end without a voice. In Matteo's letter, I didn't blame him. I told him I forgave him, even if he never asked for it. I wrote that I loved him, that I always would, that no decision he made could undo the years I spent building his life. I sealed it and placed it in the notebook. On the day of the hearing, Maria met me at the courthouse. She wore a gray blazer and held a folder thick with evidence. I wore my best blouse, the one with the lace collar. I had ironed it 3 times the night before, making sure not a single wrinkle remained. It was all I could control. The courtroom was cold. The judge did not smile. I sat silently as Maria spoke. She told them about my stroke, about my years of work, about my son, about my life. She painted a picture I was too scared to describe myself. When the judge looked at me, I met his eyes. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I just said, I have nothing left in Mexico. My home is here, even if no one wants me. He didn't respond. He said he would review the documents, that a decision would come in the mail, and then it was over. The walk home felt longer than the hearing. I held onto the railings, rested often. My body betrayed me, but I kept walking, one slow step at a time, because no matter what the letter said, I still had that right to walk, to exist, to be seen. That night, I placed a candle in the window, just like my mother used to do when someone in the village went missing. It was a way of saying, we're still waiting. We still believe. If you've ever faced the fear of losing your place in the only home you've ever known, share your truth in the comments with the words, my story matters. Let this be the space where we refuse to be erased. And if you carry a story that deserves to be honored, I hope you'll subscribe. Because every time someone listens, we become harder to forget. Every morning after the hearing, I woke up early and checked the mailbox before the sun even touched the sidewalk. My legs still struggled. My balance was shaky, but I made that slow walk, gripping the railings along the porch, watching the sky shift from black to soft gray as the streetlights flickered out one by one. I opened the mailbox with trembling hands, always empty, always echoing with silence. Weeks passed like that. Waiting became its own kind of grief, a quiet one, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. I avoided the living room. I avoided Matteo. We existed under the same roof, but we had become ghosts to one another. He left early, came home late. When we crossed paths, his eyes never met mine. Like if he looked at me too long, he'd see what he did and feel something, or maybe nothing. Maybe that was the real wound. Stayed in my room most days, practicing my speech therapy exercises alone, rolling a tennis ball against the wall to rebuild strength in my right arm, reading books I could barely focus on. I rewatched old telenovelas on low volume just to fill the silence, and I prayed, not for miracles, just for peace, just to be seen. One day, out of nowhere, I received a letter from Laura Henderson, the daughter of the woman I once cared for. She had written another statement, this one more personal. She included a photo of me and her mother in the garden, arms around each other, laughing. Her handwriting was elegant, warm. She wrote, I hope they see the woman I see. I held the photo against my chest and cried. Then came a call from Maria. She sounded tired. The government had delayed my case due to a backlog. Nothing would move for another few months. She apologized. I told her not to. I was used to waiting, but what I didn't tell her was that every delay felt like another layer of dust, settling over me, like the world was slowly forgetting I had ever existed here. I started sorting through my belongings, not because I had decided to leave, but because when you've lived in limbo long enough, you start preparing for every possible ending. I gave away some of my clothes to the church, packed a small box with photos and letters. I found an old Polaroid of Matteo as a toddler, covered in spaghetti, his smile pure and messy. I stared at it for a long time. Then, I put it in my coat pocket. I wanted to keep it close. One afternoon, I heard the door open. Heavy steps. Matteo. He was alone. He passed my door but then paused. For the first time in weeks, he knocked. I didn't know whether to answer, but my heart moved before my mind did. Come in, I said. He entered like a stranger entering a waiting room. He didn't sit. He looked at the floor. They sent a letter, he finally said. My hands clenched. What letter? He pulled it from his jacket and handed it to me. It was from the immigration court. I recognized the seal. My breath caught. I opened it slowly, like it might explode. My eyes scanned the words, the English thick like mud. I found the section Maria told me to look for. Postponed. No final decision. Deferred. My body sagged in the chair. It wasn't an ending, but it wasn't freedom either. Just more time. Another year of waiting. Another year of limbo. Matteo stood there awkwardly, watching me absorb it. He said, "I thought you should know." I nodded. Silence between us filled the room like smoke. Then, as he turned to leave, I asked, "Why did you call them?" He stopped, but he didn't turn around. He whispered, "I didn't know what else to do." Those words, so small, so cowardly, so real. I wanted to scream, to demand why a son would choose fear over his own mother. But I didn't, because I knew the answer. I had raised him to survive. I just didn't realize he might survive by burying me. After he left, I took a long shower. I scrubbed my body, slowly, carefully, as if trying to wash off the betrayal. But it didn't come off. It never does. That night, I lit another candle in the window. Not for hope, not for justice, but for clarity. Because somewhere between the pain and the patience, I had started seeing myself again, not as a victim, but as a woman who had endured. The next day, I called Maria and told her I wanted to write a formal statement for my case. My own words, my own truth. She agreed. I wrote for hours. I didn't write like a lawyer. I wrote like a mother, like a woman, like a fighter. I wrote about the first steps I took after my stroke, about the smell of bleach on my hands after years of cleaning, about how the taste of tamales still reminded me of the nights I rocked Matteo to sleep. I wrote about what it means to give everything and be left with nothing, and how, even in that nothing, I still find strength, because that is the part no government document can measure, no court can erase, the part that survives, no matter who leaves or what gets taken. If you have ever been made to feel small by a system that never saw your full story, leave a comment that says, "My voice is not paperwork." Let this space honor your existence. And if you believe in justice that sees the person before the status, subscribe to this channel. Every click is a reminder that we are still here, still human, still worth fighting for. The days after the postponement dragged on like a long breath held underwater. I moved through the house like a whisper, my steps lighter, not because I was healed, but because I had made peace with something deeper than pain. The waiting would continue, but now I was no longer waiting to be saved. I was learning how to hold my story upright, even when everything else around me leaned toward collapse. I resumed my therapy with a different kind of focus, not desperation, not fear, but quiet determination. I no longer moved for the approval of others. I moved because my body still belonged to me. I spoke slowly, carefully, working through the slurred syllables that had once made me ashamed to speak. Now, every word I reclaimed felt like a small rebellion, a declaration that I still had things to say. I started helping at the church once a week, folding bulletins, preparing small bags of food for the elderly. No one asked for my papers there. No one asked what I could offer. They simply welcomed me. Teresa made sure I had a chair with extra padding for my back. One day, she brought me tea in a porcelain cup with a chipped handle and said, "You are one of us." I held that cup with both hands like it was made of gold, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled and meant it. At home, Matteo was quieter, not distant, just uncertain, like someone walking through the ruins of a house they helped burn down. He started bringing groceries without being asked. Once, he even bought the kind of lotion I used for my joints, placed it on the table without a word. I said, "Thank you." He nodded. The silence between us was no longer cruel. It was cautious, fragile, as if we both feared it might break if we spoke too loudly. One evening, he came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where I had once hidden from his coldness. He said, "Do you need help with your forms?" I looked at him and asked, "Why now?" He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "Because I don't know how to fix what I did, but I want to try." That sentence hung in the air like a soft rain. It didn't erase the past, but it watered something I thought had died. I handed him the form I had been struggling with for 2 days. He helped me fill it out, slowly, patiently, like a son remembering how to be a son. We didn't talk much that night, but something changed. In the following weeks, I started receiving more letters, not from the court, from people in the community. A woman I had once worked with wrote to say she was praying for me. A former neighbor sent a small card with a drawing of a dove and the words, You are not alone. Even the woman who ran the corner bodega where I used to buy tortillas added a note to my bag one day. It read, "We see you. We are with you." I kept every message in a small box by my bed. On the hard nights, I opened it and read their words out loud, reminding myself that no matter what the system decided, I had already been witnessed, and that meant I existed. Then, something unexpected happened. Maria called to tell me that a reporter from a local immigrant rights newsletter wanted to write a small story about me. I laughed. "Me? In the news?" She said, "Your story matters, and people need to hear it." I agreed, on one condition, that they didn't make me look like a victim. I wanted them to see the strength behind the struggle, the fire behind the silence. She promised. When the article came out, it was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was honest. It spoke about the life I built in the shadows, the stroke, the betrayal, the fight, and my will to stay. My photo was small, taken from behind, with the light falling over my shoulder as I sat in the church folding food bags. A few days later, I received another letter, not from immigration. It was from a woman named Gloria. She had read the article. She wrote, "I am undocumented too, and I thought I was invisible until I saw you." She included her phone number and asked if I would like to meet someday. I wept because that's all we ever really want, to be seen, not as problems, not as burdens, but as people. The strength of a community is not in its laws. It is in its ability to remember each other, to hold space for the ones who are pushed aside, to say, "You matter," even when the government says otherwise. I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Not safety, not certainty, but dignity. I walked into my next therapy session taller, slower, but taller. The nurse noticed. She said, "You look different today." I smiled and replied, "I remember who I am." And that made all the difference. If you've ever felt like the world forgot your name, your story, or your worth, leave a comment that says, "I remember who I am." Let this place be the mirror that reflects you back to yourself. And if you believe in the quiet courage of those who live between the cracks of society, subscribe, not for the numbers, but because every new voice in this space helps us drown out the silence. Together, we make sure no one is erased. There comes a moment after the chaos, after the silence, after the dust finally settles, when you sit with yourself, not as the version others see or the one the system labeled, but as the person you truly are. That moment came to me one quiet morning as the sun poured through the window and warmed my hands. The same hands that had once trembled so violently I could not hold a cup. Now they held a pencil, a journal, my voice. I wrote that morning not because I had to, but because I could. That was the first time in months that I wrote something just for me. Not for a court, not for a lawyer, not for the system. Just a woman writing her story down so that no piece of it would be lost again. It struck me how much life had changed since the stroke, since the betrayal, since the letter, but also how much of me had survived. Not just survived, grown. I had become a woman who could still love, even when love had failed her, who could still fight, even when her body was tired, who could still choose dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. There was no miracle moment, no sweeping decision from a judge, no grand apology from the people who hurt me. What I got was something smaller, but in some ways, even more powerful. I got myself back, piece by piece, one conversation, one letter, one act of kindness at a time. Mateo never said the words I wanted to hear, but he began doing small things that mattered, fixing the railing on the porch, refilling my prescriptions without being asked, leaving a blanket folded at the foot of my bed on cold nights. I learned that sometimes healing comes in actions, not apologies. The community kept showing up. Gloria invited me to her house for tamales. We sat in her kitchen, two undocumented women, laughing over spilled salsa and shared pain. She called me hermana. I hadn't heard that word in so long. It made my chest ache in the best way. The women at the church started calling me Tia. They brought me soup when I was sick, shared stories about their families. We prayed together, not always for answers, just for strength. And somewhere in all of that, I started smiling again without guilt, laughing without shame, hoping without fear. I still don't know what the final decision will be, whether I will be allowed to stay or forced to leave. But I do know this: no matter what happens, I have left a mark. My story exists, my truth has been spoken, and that makes me unerasable. If you are watching this and you've ever felt like the world forgot you, I see you. If you've been silenced, overlooked, discarded, you matter. If you've had to rebuild your life from the ashes of someone else's decisions, you are not alone. Write in the comments, "I am unerasable." Let that be the promise we make to one another, that no matter how quiet they try to keep us, we will never disappear. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel. This space is for you, for your mother, for your neighbor, for the woman down the street who walks with quiet courage every single day. Here, we share stories that are meant to be remembered. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for listening with more than just your ears. You gave my story a home. Now, take a deep breath and click on the next video that's about to appear on your screen, because there are more voices to hear, more hearts to touch, and together we will keep telling the stories that were never meant to be forgotten. From my soul to yours, thank you.